On the morning of May 19, 1536, the air in the Tower of London was heavy, not only with the fog drifting in from the Thames but with the weight of what was about to unfold. And Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, walked to the scaffold with a composure that unnerved those present. Witnesses, accustomed to seeing the condemned tremble or beg, noticed something peculiar. Just before the French executioner, specially brought from Calais, raised his sword and smiled. It wasn't a defiant smirk or a nervous twitch. It was a serene, almost enigmatic smile that left everyone wondering. What on earth was she thinking? Why would someone about to lose their head, literally, smile? The answer to this question has intrigued historians, novelists, and the curious for nearly 500 years, and while there's no absolute truth, the clues and left behind, combined with the context of her life and era, allow us to weave a narrative that, if it doesn't solve the mystery, at least sheds some Tudor light and a touch of English humor on it. To understand why Anne Boleyn smiled, we first need to step back and meet the woman behind the myth. Anne was no ordinary noblewoman. Born around 1501, though some historians argue for 1507, as records from the time were about as precise as a sundial in a storm, she was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious diplomat with a knack for sniffing out power like a bloodhound on a trail. Her mother, Elizabeth Howard, came from an aristocratic family with roots so deep in English nobility they could probably trace their lineage back to some knight who fought with William the Conqueror, and grew up in a world where women were, at best, bargaining chips in the game of power and, at worst, mere ornaments in the courts of powerful men. But Anne wasn't one to settle for being just another piece on the board. From a young age, she showed a spark that set her apart, a blend of sharp intelligence and a charm that could either disarm or unsettle, depending on who was in her presence. Her education was key to understanding her character. Unlike many women of her time, who learned little beyond embroidery and prayers, and was sent to the Netherlands at age 12 to serve in the court of Margaret of Austria, a regent known for her intellect and refined court. There, Anne absorbed the arts of diplomacy, protocol, and witty conversation. But it was in France, where she spent several years at the court of Francis I, that her personality truly took shape. Under the influence of Marguerite of Angoulême, the king's sister and a key figure in the French Renaissance, and learned to navigate a world of political and cultural intrigue. France was a hotbed of new ideas: humanism, religious reform, poetry, and the art of intellectual seduction. And, with her agile mind, learned to debate, flirt with words, and project a presence that was both magnetic and slightly dangerous. When she returned to England around 1522, she wasn't just a lady-in-waiting. She was a whirlwind in a skirt, a woman who knew how to wield her intelligence as a weapon and her charm as a shield. Henry VIII, the king who would change the course of English history for her, wasn't exactly the romantic hero one might imagine. In his younger years, Henry was athletic, charismatic, and, let's say, reasonably attractive, with a reddish beard that likely inspired a sonnet or two and a physique that hadn't yet succumbed to the excesses of the royal table. He was a cultured man, capable of composing music and writing poetry, but he also had an ego the size of a castle and an almost pathological obsession with securing a male heir to keep the Tudors on the throne. When he met in around 1525, Henry was trapped in a marriage to Catherine of Aragon, a devout queen and daughter of Spain's Catholic monarchs, who had been a loyal partner but failed to produce the male heir he craved. Catherine, 6 years older than Henry, had endured several failed pregnancies, and her only surviving child, Mary, didn't meet the dynastic expectations of a king dreaming of a male legacy. Henry was ready for a change, and Anne, with her shrewd gaze, sharp wit, and a neck that, rumor had it, could make any necklace look like a masterpiece, stepped onto the stage at the perfect moment, and didn't throw herself into Henry's arms. This is where her story gets fascinating. Unlike other women who might have seen the king as a golden ticket to wealth and status, and played her cards with a precision that would make a chess grandmaster blush, she refused to be his mistress, a decision that in her time was as bold as refusing to pay taxes today. Royal mistresses were common, but Anne had bigger ambitions. She insisted she would only be his as a wife, a stance that not only ignited Henry's passion but led him to trigger one of history's greatest ruptures, the break with the Catholic Church. divorcing Catherine wasn't as simple as signing a paper. Pope Clement VII, under pressure from Emperor Charles V, Catherine's nephew, wasn't willing to annul the marriage. Henry, fed up with waiting and likely blinded by his obsession with Anne, decided England didn't need the Pope. Thus, the Church of England was born, with Henry as its supreme head, a move that not only changed the country's religion but redrew Europe's political map. All for Anne. If that's not pressure, I don't know what is. Henry and Anne's courtship was a drama worthy of a modern soap opera, but with more velvet layers and less flattering lighting. For nearly 7 years, Henry wrote passionate letters to Anne, some of which survive and show a king oscillating between ardent devotion and almost adolescent frustration. In one, he promises his heart will be dedicated to you alone, and complains about how much he misses her. And meanwhile, kept just the right distance, responding with enough charm to keep him hooked but never giving in to his demands. This cat-and-mouse game was not only risky but made her a polarizing figure. To some, she was a manipulative seductress. To others, a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. When they finally married in 1533, after the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine, and was already a figure who inspired both admiration and hatred. But let's return to that smile on the scaffold. To understand it, we need to picture the context of her fall. And became queen in a lavish ceremony in June 1533, but her coronation wasn't the fairy tale one might expect. The streets of London, which should have been filled with cheers, were eerily silent. Catherine of Aragon had many supporters, especially among traditional Catholics, who saw and as a usurper, a concubine, who had seduced the king and broken the sacred union with Rome. And, with her French-educated air and reputation for being a bit too clever for her own good, wasn't exactly the people's favorite. Still, she had allies. Her family, the Boleyns, who had risen in court thanks to her marriage, and a circle of religious reformers who saw her as a champion of new Protestant ideas. Her greatest triumph, and also her greatest vulnerability, was the birth of her daughter Elizabeth in September 1533. Elizabeth, who would later become one of history's most iconic queens, wasn't the son Henry expected. Though the king celebrated the birth publicly, the disappointment was clear. And, aware that her position depended on producing a male heir, faced immense pressure. Her subsequent pregnancies ended in miscarriages, and each loss chipped away at her relationship with Henry. To make matters worse, and wasn't one to stay silent. Her temperament, which had once charmed the king, now irritated him. She argued with him, challenged his decisions, and, according to rumors, wasn't always subtle in expressing her frustration. In a court where deference was the norm, Anne's frankness was like tossing a torch into a powder keg. Meanwhile, a new figure emerged at court. Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, who was everything and was not. Jane was quiet, modest, and, by the standards of the time, the equivalent of a glass of water after a shot of whiskey. Her calm and apparent docility were a direct contrast to Anne's intensity, and Henry, tired of his wife's fireworks, found in Jane a soothing alternative. If Anne was a storm, Jane was a spring breeze, and Henry, like many men in a midlife crisis, was drawn to the novelty. In 1536, things unraveled quickly. Anne was accused of adultery, treason, and even incest with her brother George, charges that historians today largely consider fabricated. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's minister and a master of political intrigue, orchestrated her downfall with an efficiency that would make Machiavelli take notes. Anne's alleged lovers, including several courtiers and her own brother, were arrested, tortured, and executed. Anne's trial was a sham. The evidence was circumstantial, the witnesses unreliable, and the verdict a foregone conclusion. Sentenced to death, Anne was imprisoned in the Tower of London, where she spent her final days reflecting on her fate. Here's where the story gets even more intriguing. Despite the gravity of her situation, accounts from the time describe Anne as remarkably composed. She spoke with her ladies-in-waiting, prayed, and, according to some, even joked about her fate. Her comment about the French executioner and her slender neck is a prime example of her dark humor, a testament to her ability to find some lightness in the macabre. This behavior suggests and had extraordinary emotional control, a strength that might explain that smile on the scaffold. But before we get to that moment, it's worth pausing on the details of her execution, as the context is crucial to understanding her state of mind. Unlike common executions, which were often brutal spectacles involving axes that sometimes required multiple blows and received special treatment, Henry, in a gesture that could be seen as a last vestige of respect or simply an obsession with appearances, hired a swordsman from Calais, known for his ability to behead with a single clean stroke. This wasn't a minor detail. Botched beheadings could prolong the victim's suffering, and Anne, who likely heard tales of clumsy executions, knew her death would be swift. This knowledge may have offered her some small comfort, strange as it sounds. The choice of executioner was also a message. Henry wanted his queen's execution to be an orderly, almost theatrical event, befitting a king in control of his realm. On the day of her execution, Anne walked to the scaffold dressed in a simple gray or black gown, depending on the source, and a headdress that concealed her famous dark hair. The crowd, a mix of nobles, courtiers, and onlookers, watched in silence. Executions were public spectacles, but this one was different. This wasn't a common criminal but a queen, a woman who had altered the course of England's history. Witnesses, according to accounts, expected tears, pleas, or perhaps an outburst of rage. Instead, Anne delivered a short, carefully crafted speech. She declared her loyalty to the king, asked the crowd to pray for her, and notably, admitted no guilt. This act of restraint was classic and, even in her most vulnerable moment, she controlled the narrative. And then, just before the executioner raised his sword, came the smile. It wasn't a broad, sarcastic, or hysterical smile. Witnesses described it as subtle, almost melancholic, but undeniably present. What was going through her mind? One theory is that Anne smiled because she knew her legacy would endure. Though she couldn't foresee her daughter Elizabeth's reign, Anne was a woman of vision. She had supported religious reform, influenced the break with Rome, and given birth to a daughter who, even in her short life, already showed signs of her mother's intelligence. And, with her experience in European courts, might have sensed that her impact wouldn't end with her death. Her smile, then, could have been a silent acknowledgement that, though her life was ending, her influence would echo on. Another possibility is that her smile was an act of pride, and knew she was being watched, not just by the crowd at the Tower but by history itself. In an era where public emotions were carefully staged, dying with dignity was a way to control the narrative. The condemned often used their final moments to make statements, whether proclaiming innocence or accepting their fate with grace. And, with her courtly experience, understood the power of image. Her smile may have been a message to the crowd. She wasn't broken, she wasn't defeated. She was a queen to the end, and no one, not even Henry, could take that from her. This subtle act of defiance would have been typical of Anne, a woman who never bowed to adversity, even when it held a sword. The religious dimension of her smile also deserves consideration. Anne was a reformer, influenced by the Protestant ideas beginning to circulate in Europe. Though not a radical Lutheran, she supported the translation of the Bible into English and had a genuine interest in personal spirituality. During her final days in the Tower, she reportedly spent hours in prayer, seeking solace in her faith. Some historians suggest and found in religion a source of inner peace, a certainty that her soul was prepared for what came next. Her smile might have reflected that peace, a serene acceptance of her fate based on the belief that death wasn't the end but a step towards something greater. In an era where religion permeated every aspect of life, this interpretation isn't far-fetched. On the other hand, we can't dismiss the possibility that her smile was an act of pure defiance. Anne knew the charges against her were, at best, dubious and, at worst, a complete fabrication. Thomas Cromwell, with Henry's tacit approval, had woven a web of lies to get rid of her. The accusations of adultery with multiple men, including her brother, were so scandalous they bordered on absurd. And with her sharp intelligence, likely saw through the farce. Her smile might have been a way of looking at the crowd, the executioner, and perhaps even Henry's spectre, and saying, "I know this is a lie, and one day everyone will know it." It was her way of claiming a moral victory, even if her body wouldn't survive to tell the tale. The role of the French executioner adds a layer of irony to the scene. Henry, in a gesture that could be seen as an attempt to ease his conscience or simply a display of his obsession with control, ensured the execution was as clean as possible. The swordsman from Calais was a luxury in the world of executions, a professional whose reputation guaranteed and wouldn't suffer unnecessarily. This detail, though macabre, might have influenced her state of mind. Knowing her death would be quick, and might have felt a practical relief. Her comment about her slender neck suggests she was aware of the logistics of her execution, and her smile could have been a reaction to the irony of the situation. Even in her death, Henry was obsessed with appearances, ensuring his queen's execution was a well-staged spectacle. The witnesses, though not all sympathetic to Anne, were struck by her composure. Her speech on the scaffold was a model of restraint and strategy. She didn't attack the king, which would have been futile and dangerous for her daughter. Instead, she expressed loyalty, asked for prayers, and bid farewell with a dignity that disarmed her detractors. This control over her final words suggests her smile wasn't an accident but part of a carefully planned performance. Anne knew her death would be remembered, and she wanted it to be for the right reasons. But not all theories about her smile are so lofty. Some speculate Anne was simply exhausted. Life in Henry's court was a minefield, where every word, gesture, and glance had to be calculated, and had spent years navigating intrigues, facing enemies like Cromwell, and enduring the pressure of being the woman who changed England's fate. Her miscarriages, tensions with Henry, and constant scrutiny from her enemies must have been draining. Perhaps, in that final moment, the idea of leaving that infernal life behind brought a strange sense of relief. Not that she wanted to die, but maybe, in a corner of her mind, she saw death as an escape from a game she could no longer win. Her smile, then, might have been an acknowledgement of the absurdity of her situation. After all she had fought for, the end was inevitable. The impact of her smile cannot be understated. Witnesses, used to executions as spectacles of suffering or repentance, couldn't stop mentioning it. In contemporary accounts, it's described as a moment that baffled everyone, a detail that turned her death into more than just an execution, and, even in her final breath, managed to capture the imagination of those watching. And not just them. Over the centuries, her smile became a symbol of her enigma, an invitation to speculate about what was going through her mind. The historiography of Anne Boleyn has evolved over time, and her smile has been interpreted in many ways. In the 16th century, her enemies painted her as a witch, a seductress who had bewitched the king and destroyed England's religious unity. Her smile, in this context, might have been seen as proof of her arrogance or even her wickedness. But in the 19th century, romantics transformed her into a tragic figure, a woman ahead of her time, victim of a capricious king and a patriarchal court. Her smile, to them, was that of a martyr facing her fate with courage. In the 20th century, feminists reclaimed her as a symbol of resistance against the patriarchy, and her smile became a gesture of defiance, a refusal to be silenced by the forces seeking to destroy her. Each interpretation adds a layer to the mystery, but none fully resolves it. The documents from the time are scarce and tinged with the biases of their authors. Court chroniclers, foreign ambassadors, and gossip-mongers of the era offer contradictory versions, and Anne left no confessional diary to clarify her thoughts. What she did leave was a daughter, Elizabeth, who inherited her intelligence and tenacity, and a legacy that changed the course of English history. Her smile, in that sense, might have been a premonition of her lasting impact, a sign that, though her life was ending, her story was just beginning. If we allow ourselves a bit of speculation, we might imagine Anne smiled because she had a secret, something no one else knew. There's no evidence for this, of course, but it's tempting to think a woman as shrewd as Anne left something in reserve, a hidden letter, a message for Elizabeth, or even a private joke only she understood. After all, Anne was a master strategist, a woman who had played political chess with the best and, though she lost the final game, did so with a style that still resonates. Her smile might have been her last move, a reminder that, even in defeat, Anne Boleyn was still Anne Boleyn. The truth, as is often the case with historical mysteries, is that we'll probably never know for certain why she smiled. The documents are scarce, and those that exist are colored by the biases of their writers. Court chroniclers, foreign ambassadors, and gossipmongers offer contradictory accounts, and left no confessional diary to set the record straight. What we do know is that her smile left a mark. Witnesses couldn't help but mention it, and that small detail has echoed through the centuries, becoming a kind of historical enigma that invites us to imagine, speculate, and yes, laugh a little at the audacity of a woman who, even facing death, found a way to stand out. So, why did Anne Boleyn smile? Perhaps it was an act of faith, a gesture of defiance, a private joke, or simply a human reaction to the absurdity of her situation. Or maybe, as a skilled strategist, she knew her smile would be remembered, analyzed, and debated for generations. In a world where women rarely controlled their fate, and found a way to control her exit. And if that doesn't deserve a smile, I don't know what does.